Hi everyone, welcome to the Defeat Diabetes Facebook Live, and welcome to our wonderful dietitian Nicole Moore. Hi Nicole,
Hello.
great to have you on board. So today is basically a bit of a Q&A. It's over to you guys to ask the questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. So we've had a few questions already sent in, so we're going to start off with those. But then, if you've got questions, please put them on the chat site, and we'll do our best to answer them. So Nicole, you can kick off first. The first question is someone asking about calories in, calories out. We've heard that sort of mantra for years now. It's all about calories in, calories out, and we don't think that's quite as important. So, what are your thoughts on calories in, calories out?
Yeah, well, I guess it's something I get asked pretty much every day, and I think most people that have been on the journey of trying to reverse their diabetes or lose weight know that they've already tried to basically eat less, move more, and really haven't been able to get the results they want from their metabolic health improvement and their type 2 diabetes. And we know that obesity and weight issues and metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes is really driven from the issue of having insulin resistance. And when you're producing that hormone, particularly in excess, when you've got insulin resistance and sort of bathing your body on a regular basis in too much insulin's a great sort of fat storage hormone. And so even if you don't eat a lot of calories, if you eat those calories from carbohydrate sources, it's going to make your body just keep flooding with too much insulin. The body just locks in weight. So, so many people try to eat less and they don't eat fat because we know fat and, meat and cheese and these sorts of foods have a lot of calories. So people tend to avoid those and they might be drinking a shake, or they might be trying to have, low fat foods and, eat lots of, brown rice and sweet potato and pasta and avoid the fats to keep their calories down. And find that what they just keep doing is driving their glucose up and driving their insulin up, and their body just locks that fat in and they just can't lose weight. So trying to count calories means that people end up eating too much carbohydrate and blood glucose won't improve, and they'll struggle to lose weight. They'll feel hungry because insulin drives ghrelin and leptin and imbalances it and makes people hangry, or as we've talked before, Peter, is hungry and angry. So calorie counting does not work. And when people come in to see me, I talk about good quality protein like meat and chicken and fish and eggs and full fat dairy. And I talk about healthy fats like butter and olive oil and nuts and seeds and avocado, and that these particular foods don't drive that insulin and that glucose spike. And so 200 calories of salmon and eggs and cheese and avocado are actually not going to create and drive a lot of that excess insulin and cause problems with blood glucose and weight. 200 calories of fruit or breakfast cereal that had sugar in it, those carbohydrate and sugar calories are actually going to do far more damage. So it's really about, throwing away the concept of how many calories am I consuming and trying to consume less. And it's making sure the type of calorie that you're eating is good fats and good protein. And then if you do that, your body's insulin drops, your glucose reduces, your metabolic syndrome basically starts to go into remission. You feel less hungry and you end up eating less naturally rather than trying to be hangry and eat less, move more and not achieve your health goals. So my advice to anyone, and I've already spoken to about 3 people today and given that same story, is stop counting calories and focus on getting your calories from protein and healthy fats. So yeah, definitely throw out the eat less, move more model. And as we do at Defeat Diabetes, focus on good protein and healthy fats, and you'll achieve your health goals.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that 300 calories from a piece of baked salmon is, the same equivalent as 300 calories from a donut. And,
Yes.
I mean, according to the calories model, they're equally equally beneficial. But we know that it's what's in the calories. It's just as important as the calories themselves. Trudy, who asked that question, also wanted to know about tracking fibre. Do you need to track your fibre as well?
I think the key really is just eat your fibre through above ground green leafy vegetables and your nuts and your seeds. You really don't need to track fibre. I think it's just about ensuring that with the meals that you eat, that you've got some above ground green leafies and that you're snacking on nuts and seeds. I think we all feel that we need a lot more fibre than we do. And I think people are actually having problems with eating way too much fibre and actually causing worse problems with their gut. And what I find as a low carb dietitian in practice is that, people come in with all sorts of gut inflammation and they're shoving in all brand cereal and, loads of fruit and fruit juices and trying to pump in all this, fruit fibre and grain fibre and cereal fibre, and they're actually getting more inflamed and it's actually doing their gut an injustice. So, you get enough of the fibre you really need from, your green leafy veggies and your nuts and seeds and your avocado. So just focus on, avoiding the starchy carbs and the added sugars, increase your proteins and your healthy fats, and just eat your fibre from your green leafies and nuts and seeds through the day. Maybe a few berries in there, which we know are good fibre and low sugar. And you'll find you'll get more than enough fibre. There have been studies to show you meet your nutrient needs and your fibre needs on a low carb diet. So no need to track it. Just eat those sort of fibre foods and you'll be fine.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. I hope that's answered your questions, Trudy. In fact, Trudy's just popped up and said thank you. So good, Trudy. Okay. Suzanne asked, does exercise play a key role to success with this program? She tells us that other than getting about my normal working day, I hate any extra exercise. I've had 2 knee replacements and now have arthritis in my ankles. What can I do? Well, exercise does play a role. Certainly, it's less of a role than diet. I mean, some people think that you can outrun a bad diet, and you certainly can't do that. So diet is our major focus, but exercise can be certainly very beneficial. There's no doubt that exercise is good for your health. It plays a role in weight loss, probably more in maintenance of weight loss than actual weight loss. I think weight loss, I think you'd agree, Nicole, is really very largely about diet. But there are a lot of other benefits to exercise, and particularly for people with diabetes and pre-diabetes, exercise can be very beneficial. Now, the challenge obviously is to work out, what exercise and an exercise that suits the individual. Now, in Suzanne's case, she's had knee replacement. She's got arthritis in her ankle. So she's not going to be out there pounding the pavements, getting her exercise that way. But there are lots of different ways in which you can get your exercise. And people always say to me, oh, what's the best exercise? Well, I tell them it's the exercise that you'll continue to do and that you'll enjoy. And that can be, any one of all sorts of exercise. A lot of people with arthritis of the knees and ankle and so on want to avoid weight-bearing exercise, so they prefer non-weight-bearing exercise, which might be cycling, or swimming, or water aerobics. Water exercises are a great way of exercising if you don't want to sort of damage those knees and ankles anymore. So that can be very, very beneficial. I think the other important thing about exercise is, as well as doing what we call sort of aerobic exercise, if you like, or cardiac exercise, it's also to do resistance exercise, to do strengthening, because as we get older, we lose our strength, we lose our muscle strength, and it's really important to maintain that. When we lose our muscle strength, we get weaker, we are more prone to falls, we have trouble getting out of a chair, just day-to-day activities are difficult. So it's important to maintain your strength. So as well as doing your aerobic exercises, whether that might be swimming or cycling or walking, it's important to do some resistance exercise. Now, I'm not saying you have to go down to the gym and pump iron and all that sort of stuff. That's not necessary. But even body weight exercises, even just carrying the shopping, doing the housework, all that sort of resistance exercise. Push-ups, sit-ups, exercise you can do on your lounge room floor. You don't have to go and enroll in a gym or do anything fancy. You might want to do it in a group. I think anything that's going to improve your chances of doing of continuing to exercise is important. So it's got to be an exercise you enjoy. It's got to be fun. You've got to, if you do it with friends, that might be more enjoyable. It doesn't matter what time of the day you do it. It doesn't matter. People say, how often should you do it? I mean, ideally, you do some exercise every day, just part of your life. But at least 3 times a week, I think I try and do a little exercise regime 3 mornings a week where I get on the stationary bike and do a session on that, and then I do some weights and sit-ups and push-ups and so on to do a bit of resistance exercise. So exercise, very important for health, not quite as important for weight loss. All right. We've got, thank you for all the questions that you're bringing in. Let's start tackling some of those, shall we, Nicole? Okay, let's start with Debbie, who says, will a diet with fat affect my cholesterol? Now, that's we get that question a lot, don't we?
Absolutely do. And I guess we want to keep it fairly simple today. So the explanation I often, give to my clients that come through is just to, and I guess I've said this many times, is that we don't want to blame, the butter for what the bread did. In a very simple term is that, there are different, cholesterol is something we need to survive. And I say to my clients that come in that there's actually 8 types of LDL, and LDL's technically the supposed bad cholesterol. And it's really about the particle size of that LDL that's the issue. And when you have a lot of sugar in your diet, whether it's you're eating, more carbohydrates than the body's able to cope with, you're having a lot of added sugar products and breakfast cereals with sugar. It's the sugar that actually can damage the cholesterol and make it small and dense. And if you have the small, dense LDLs, because you've had a lot of sugar floating in your blood, or you've got prediabetes or type 2, then that cholesterol becomes a problem. But if you're actually eating a low carbohydrate diet and you're focusing on protein and good fats that don't put sugar in the blood, then the cholesterol sits there very happy and it recycles back and it doesn't get damaged proteins. So the body just recycles it and uses it for what it needs to and just keeps, recycling it around. And it doesn't get damaged by the sugar in our blood. And so it stays what we'll call fat and fluffy. And that doesn't become an issue. And there is also, research showing that insulin resistance, again, driving our metabolic disease and our dishealth, can actually cause some damage to our endothelial cells and in our vessels. And so it's that combo of nasty, small dents and, damage in the arteries, which is driven from sugar and excess chronically produced insulin in our body. So if your cholesterol does go up a little bit on a low carbohydrate diet, which it actually can because we're eating more good, healthy fats, it's really important to have a discussion with your doctor about, the type of cholesterol it is. And I think, not all GPs out there really, know the difference with the different particle sizes. So that's, I guess, where we try to get people on board with a doctor that maybe understands that more. But there are the further, tests that we can have. Looking at triglyceride and HDL ratios is really important. You can get a coronary artery calcium score. That is a good indication of if you've even got plaques there. And I get so many people that, have really good triglyceride levels and excellent HDL levels, and their coronary artery calcium scores don't have any plaque in there. So, I think there's a lot of measures, and Peter, I'm sure you've got things to add to that, but I guess that's just how I explain to people is you've just got to be aware and do some reading, because unless you understand it, it's very hard to make sure your GP understands. They're just looking at total cholesterol. So you do not have to be worried, straight away that, you need to have some more investigations to make sure of the particle size of your cholesterol. It's the sugar that's creating the havoc in our body. It's not the cholesterol. And there's a lot of, evidence-based articles out there that actually support that as well. So I'm not sure what you'd like to add to that as well, Peter, in that.
No, you covered it very well, Nicole. I mean, often your cholesterol will actually go down a little bit on a low carb diet, but sometimes, you're right, it does go up. But it's the important thing. We've got it all wrong basically with the whole cholesterol thing, in that everyone worries about this LDL cholesterol, and that's probably not as important as you said. It's the triglycerides and the HDL that are really important. And I just read a review article yesterday, again confirming that the triglyceride HDL ratio is the single most important or best predictor of cardiac problems, and that is improved. That is always improved on a low carb diet. So the triglycerides go down, and the HDL, the so-called good cholesterol, goes up. So your triglyceride HDL ratio goes down, and that is the single best predictor of cardiovascular problems. So, in fact, you're reducing your risk on a low carb diet. The other big factor is your blood sugar. I mean, we know that high blood sugar and type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes is the biggest single risk factor for cardiac disease, cardiovascular disease. So really, the diet that we're proposing in the Defeat Diabetes program will actually reduce your cardiac risk significantly. Okay, Nicole, another one for you. How do you know when the keto diet is working? I've been on a diet for 6 months, lost 6 kilograms, but have stalled on current weight for 2 months. Cheers, Pete. And we have that a lot, don't we? That people do really well for a couple of months and so on, and then plateau. That terrible word, plateau. Tell us, what advice do you give to Pete?
Well, first of all, I always make sure that people look at the positives. And, I think number one, when you've lost 6 kilos, that's 12 tubs of, and pardon the pun when I say that, 12 tubs of margarine, because people just understand what a tub of margarine is. And we know clearly we don't eat margarine on this program. But that's a lot of fat off your body, number one. And you'll know, Pete, as many people will know, that a lot of that comes off that midsection, because as you reduce insulin and improve blood glucose and, put that insulin resistance into some form of remission or reversal, is that you lose a lot of visceral fat, you'll lose fat in your liver, you lose fat around the midsection, and that has many, many health benefits. So I think you have to look at, what your biomarkers, what your bloods have done in that 6 months to make part of the improvement that you've had in your health. So number one, just don't use, the scales as an indicator of how well you've progressed. Make sure you're looking at all those other, internal measures, the HbA1c, your long-term sugar measure, your fasting blood sugars, your liver function test, your triglycerides to HDL. All of these things will then be improving. Your waist hip will be reducing. But, the fact is that sometimes we stall. So if you're hitting a stall, and make sure it is a stall, so e.g. if it has gone on for a couple of months and your body's not shifting, without seeing a food diary and knowing where you're at, number one, I always talk about having a look at maybe where your carbs are sitting. Maybe you've been avoiding a lot of carbohydrate, but you're eating still, more fruit than your body maybe needs right now, and your carbohydrates are a little bit higher, and that's still creating a little bit of havoc with your insulin and storing weight. So check your carbohydrates. A low carb diet is sort of under 50 grams. That would be first thing I'd be looking at. Is there some carb creeping that might be causing a bit of an issue with your weight? The second thing I look at is fat. Now, we absolutely need to have good, healthy fat, but there is sometimes a moment where I get these wonderful clients coming in and their carbs are great, but they're throwing down, coconut fat bombs, and they're, drinking loads of cream in their coffee, and they're wrapping cheese around and bacon around cheese, and they're having lots of fun with all this fat. And we know that when you go low carb, the concept is we're trying to get you fat adapted. We're trying to help your insulin, I guess, go on a bit of a holiday, get your glucose down. And for people who've struggled with weight, a big part of, as I mentioned before, is that when they have a lot of insulin and they're insulin resistance, they're producing that insulin. It loves to store fat. Once you're fat adapted and you've sort of taken the carbs down, and then for a while you've been doing good fats and protein, you can actually afford to pull some of that exogenous fat down. So if you are being generous with fat, you're using lots of olive oil, and you're eating 2 avocados a day, and you're having lots and lots of macadamia nuts, all these great healthy fats, you're cooking with a lot of butter, you may be adding cream to your coffee, you can just afford to start pulling back a little bit. From a weight loss perspective, if that's a big goal for you, you want your body, once it's fat adapted, to use you as a fat source. And so you can stall if you're being too generous with your good fats. And so you can afford to pull them back a little bit, and that should generally start to sort of kickstart. And the other part of it is that, as Peter has said, there is definitely room for expenditure at some point. And when you're fat adapted and you're losing weight and you hit a stall, if you pull down your fats, you can also increase your expenditure a little bit, and that sort of helps the body want to, I guess, use more of your fat stores as well. So they are the main things, I guess, when I haven't looked at someone's food diary. But there are other things outside of nutrition: sleep, stress. There can be medical reasons. Your iron might be low. You might not be getting enough D, and you might have thyroid issues. So I think you need to be ensuring you're having a chat with your doctor. But as a dietitian, they are the things in practice I would be looking at. And then if I'm still seeing weight stalls, I'll be then sort of making sure you're back off to your GP to go, let's just look at those bloods, and maybe we're missing something. Low iron, we know, can definitely cause that problem. And if they haven't had an iron test for a while, these are things we need to look at. So there are lots of options and lots of things we need to consider. From a nutritional dietetic perspective, they're the things I'll tend to look at if you're having a weight stall. But again, make sure you look at all the other good things that are improving on your low carb journey, as well as just the scales.
Great. Well, that was a fantastic answer. Okay, Marlene wants to know, what is normal bowel movement on this diet? What do you expect? Every day, every second day? What's normal? What are your thoughts on bowel movements?
Well, look, talk about poop for a while. Look, I guess what I say is that, we don't want to, constipation, the technical term for constipation is that you are straining, that your stools are hard. So I guess if you're having those issues, ideally you are constipated. Now, frequency of bowel motions definitely change. And part of that is because we know on a low carb journey, people actually end up eating less. You're not hungry every 2 hours and shoving loads of food in your body. People just naturally come back after 2 weeks and go, well, Nicole, you said I could eat plenty of, all of the meats and chicken and fish and eggs and nuts and seeds, and I'm just not feeling like snacking anymore. So if you're having a lot less volume naturally, because you're not hungry, you're going to have less stool because there's less going through your body. So don't be concerned if your frequency of bowel actions drop to maybe, some of my clients, it is every second day. We don't want it going on longer than that. But if you're dropping your frequency, you've gone from 2 days to 1, or you're going every second day, if you're not straining and if it's not a hard stool, then it's generally a good bowel action. You've just got less volume going through your body. If you are getting constipated and it is a strain, then the things I go through, I guess, are to make sure, number one, you're drinking plenty of water. So you're getting your good 2 to 2.5 litres of fluid in. On a low carb plan, you actually do excrete a lot more fluid and salt, or salt initially from your kidneys, and therefore that drives water as well. So you can actually get a little bit dehydrated. So you do need to make sure you're drinking plenty of water. Again, if you've got hypertension issues, it's something you need to chat to your doctor about. But generally, I'll be adding a little bit of extra salt to replace the salt lost so that people don't get dehydrated and salt depleted. The other thing we usually look at is magnesium, and these are sort of really important electrolytes too, we find need to be replaced. And so taking a magnesium supplement, something that's got a combination, what I usually suggest, of an oxide in it, which is quite good for the bowel, and taking that at night just helps to usually keep the bowels regular. And also making sure you are eating your greens, that you are having lots of above ground greens, which tend to be the vegetables and salads that have a low carbohydrate content. So if you are having less frequent bowels, don't stress about it. Just make sure you're not straining and constipated. And if you are, those strategies I've just mentioned are something you need to maybe go through. But, chat to a low carb, a dietitian, and chat to your doctor. Sometimes we're having other issues with certain FODMAPs in the diet that can cause havoc with the bowel. So yeah, those things need to be discussed with your doctor and your dietitian. And usually I'd suggest people keep a food diary. And if it's an ongoing problem, it needs to be dealt with your GP. But they're the things I'd definitely be looking at in the beginning. And yeah, just understanding frequency and then it does drop down a little bit.
Great. Okay. One more for you, Nicole, and I'll give you a break. Susan asked by email, on nutrition labels, carbs and sugar labels give a percentage. Which one is the one I should focus on?
Look, again, we want to simplify this because otherwise people spend already long enough in the supermarket. For me, as a low carb dietitian, and in the past I have talked about percentages per 100 grams, but I do find that when you're doing a low carb program, it's all about, the definition of low carb is under 50 grams a day. And if we're ideally not having a lot of the starch and heaps of fruit, and we're not having breakfast cereals and yogurts with added sugars, and we're focusing on good proteins and healthy fats and above ground greens, we're going to be lower carb, absolutely anyway. But if you're picking up a product, I find it easier for my clients to look at the total carbohydrate per serving because and understand, are you going to eat that? Are you eating one of those servings or you're going to eat 5 of those servings? So look at total carb. Within the total carb, the added sugar is included in that. Okay, so if you look at total carb, it's going to include lots of starchy carb that might be in it, whether that's coming from, flour or corn or potato or rice. And it's also got to include the added sugars. So if they're adding honey or if they're adding fructose syrup or, sugars. And so if you look at total carb, you understand how much carbohydrates in that serving. And we know that 4 grams of carbohydrate is equivalent to about a teaspoon of sugar impacting your body. So I like people to keep it to 4 to 5 grams of total carb per serving as an indicator that this would technically be a low carb product. So that way, if you're looking at anything and you look at total carb per serving, you're keeping it about under 5 grams per serving, that's going to be something that's low carb. If it's starting to go up, you're starting to divide that by 4 and start to visualize how many teaspoons of sugar. Because if you look at a loaf of bread and you look at the total carbs per serving, you're going to get between 25 and 50. But if you looked at the sugar, it's going to say generally 0. If you look at a no added sugar biscuit, you get these lovely, no added sugar biscuits, but they're still made of lots of flour. They're still going to give you, and it's white flour, a lot of actual sugar still impacting your body. So just look at total carb and understand that 4 grams of carb is a teaspoon of sugar. And then, visualize the numbers of teaspoons of sugar that are going to impact your body. I think that's the really most important message. Other than that, I would look at the ingredients list and make sure that the ingredients, number one, doesn't contain, more than 4 ingredients, because the longer the list gets, the more stuff is being added in. We're looking for really bad oils in those foods. We don't care how much fat's in there. What we care about is those fats are coming from maybe butter or nuts or ghee, like natural fat. What we don't want is lots of vegetable seed oils in there, hydrogenated vegetable oils, margarines, because we know they're inflammatory. So, look at your total carb per serve. Make sure that your ingredients list isn't, 20 ingredients. Make sure if you read the ingredients list, you could probably work out what the food is without having to turn it around. That's another good sign as well. And make sure there aren't nasty vegetable seeds and oils in there and hydrogenated fats. And then I think you're winning. Again, the message is JERF, just eat real food. And most real food doesn't have a label. Avocado, healthy fats like olive oil and butter and, full fat dairy and meat, chicken and fish. They're very simple foods that keep our insulin and sugar down. So try to avoid a lot of packages if you can, but sometimes we need convenience. So if we need convenience and it has a label, they are really the simple things that I do. And always remember that, on an Australian label, the total carb is technically net carb, which is a common question I get. Do I watch total? Do I watch net? If you look at total carb on any label, it technically is the actual impacted, carb that's going to impact your blood glucose, and it doesn't include the fiber. So yeah, just looking at total carb, keep it at 5 grams or less, and you're winning really. So that's my advice I give to a lot of people that come into the clinic.
Yep, I think that's great. I mean, I think the big problem out there is that people think that while sugars might be bad, then carbohydrates are okay. And as we know, carbohydrates are broken down into sugar. So they're just sugars stuck together, and our body breaks them down. And when they're absorbed into the blood, it's all absorbed as glucose. Whether it's from sugar or whether it's from a potato, it still gets into the blood as sugar, as glucose, and raises your blood glucose. So, okay, all right, I better answer one, I guess. Leanne wants to know, if I stop taking statins, will low-carb diet be able to lower my triglyceride? Well, as I said before, I think triglyceride is really important. I mean, probably even more important than the cholesterols. And so I always look straight away at the triglyceride levels, and then at the HDL level, and then I work out the ratio between the triglyceride and the HDL. Now, the good thing about the low-carb diet is that it almost invariably lowers your triglyceride. My triglyceride halved. I was about 2.4, I think, initially when I started, and then it came down to 1.2, 1.1, and that's pretty typical with triglyceride, and that's a massive win for you if you can reduce your triglyceride like that. So as far as coming off the statins goes, although that's I'm not going to give any advice on that. My gut feel, if I had to comment, is that we're probably a bit too keen on statins. We're a bit too obsessed by cholesterol level. And I think, as I said before, I think triglyceride and HDL are just as important. I think your blood glucose is just as important. So we're not totally focused on cholesterol the way some practitioners are. Okay, next question. My next step is to convince my endocrinologist of this program. He has your letter but hasn't responded. Is there a list of endocrinologists who believe? Well, there's not a lot who admit to believing. But I don't know about you, Nicole, but I just have the feeling that the medical profession is coming around to the whole low carb thing. I mean, I think, they've for a long time, they resisted it, and it was a fad diet and this and so on. But I think, the evidence is so overwhelming now that even my, very conservative colleagues who are very reluctant to change their ideas are starting to come around. And so I think there's a lot more sympathy to the low carb diet than there used to be, particularly from the younger practitioners, I think, who are right on the ball. There are not a lot of endocrinologists, as I said, who've sort of publicly stated that they support low carb. But hopefully, I think a lot of them now are more sympathetic than they used to be. Okay, a member asked via email, my husband has type 2 diabetes and is following the low carb diet and has lost 20 kilos. He's using insulin but suspects he needs to use less. He gets mixed messages from our local diabetes advisors and doctors. He's reluctant to try reducing his insulin without some professional support. What can you suggest? Now that is always a problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, and again, I think anyone who's in this situation needs to be, getting, individualized advice with their doctor and a low carb dietitian. I guess the answer is that people have spent a large majority of, their type 2, if they're on insulin and type 2, is sort of matching almost the drugs matching their diet. So the more carbs you have, the more insulin you need, the more weight you put on, the higher your sugars go, the more insulin you need, the more weight you put on. It's this vicious cycle in the wrong way. So I work alongside, with a low carb doctor, and, she basically matches the insulin to a low carb diet. So you're just working backwards, I guess. So if you're on insulin and you're going to follow a low carb diet, number one, make sure you're in a team support. What's going to happen when you go on a low carb diet is your glucose drops. And so if your glucose drops, your low carb doctor needs to, or your GP or your endocrinologist needs to match that, I guess, medication to your blood sugars. So, if someone, and a lot of people come in to see me and they've already started on their own and their glucose has already sort of gone down. And so, you've either got to eat more carbohydrate to bring your sugars up to match your insulin, or I guess you do it the other way, but you've got to do it in a team. So I think you have to ask the question, if you're having insulin and your sugars are dropping, to a point that's a lot less than what it was, then clearly, your diet's doing the job of the drug. It's a bit like blood pressure. People we know who are going on a low carb, the first thing I say is make sure you check your blood pressure on an absolute regular basis. Keep an eye on your blood sugars. Even people type 2 on medication, if you're doing low carb, we know your sugars are going to drop. That's because the diet is reducing the sugar in your blood. So you'll need to talk to your doctor about matching, do you need less medication because the diet is going to do the job of the drug. So you just have to get someone to support you with, whatever it is that you're on. If the diet is doing the job of the drug and your blood pressures are dropping, or your cholesterol's dropping, or your glucose is dropping, and you are on certain drugs to support that, the diet is doing that now for you. So you need to get advice as to how you can match the drug and the diet better together. And I guess that's the best way of answering it, but to get support, because clearly doing it on your own sometimes can, get you into a bit of trouble. So that's my advice, I guess, Peter.
Yeah, look, I agree. I don't think you should fiddle with your insulin by yourself. But I think often if you keep a record of your blood glucose levels and take that to your diabetes educator or to your doctor and explain what you're doing and that you're on a low carb diet, and you've been told that often you have to reduce your insulin, and can you help me with this? And I'd like to gradually reduce my insulin. In nearly all cases, people with type 2 diabetes, not type 1, but type 2 diabetes, who go on to a low carb diet can get off insulin. Our initial survey of our own cohort, of our own customers, everyone who was on insulin got off insulin. Now, I'm not promising, but the majority of people will. So but you need to work with your doctor or your diabetes educator, and sometimes you have to educate them, unfortunately. Nicole, here's one that we often get. What do you recommend for dealing with cravings? Are there any snacks or drinks that will help overcome the urge for a biscuit at 3 p.m.?
Look, everyone that comes in to see me, the first thing I do is I show them what the carbs are, and then I just say, feed your face on proteins and healthy fats until you can't feed anymore. Now, number one, they already like me at that point because I'm not talking about eating less. I'm talking about eating more of the foods that don't drive cravings. Now, you've got to remember, carbohydrates, whether it's natural sugar in milk and fruit and honey, whether it's added sugars in bread, in breakfast cereals or chocolate and cake, or whether it's starchy sugar from bread, pasta, rice, they all release sugar. They all cause your body, because you've got pre-diabetes or you're struggling with weight or metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes, they all drive all this extra insulin, and that's what makes you hungry. So what you have to do in the very beginning of your journey is eat lots of protein and healthy fats. And you may need to make a, chocolate muffin using almond flour. Defeat Diabetes got some great recipes. You may need to get, a big block of dark chocolate, 85% plus to start with. And you may need a big bag of nuts, and you feed up on the foods you're allowed, because trust me, the cravings do go. So if you're still craving, you're probably not eating enough protein. So eat more protein, because when you eat more protein, it's the most satiating macronutrient. You will hit a wall where you just can't eat anymore. So go out there and eat to satiety, but eat the low carb foods, eat the proteins, eat the fats, eat the dark chocolate, eat the berries, have some cream with it. Have the fats and protein, because the cravings will settle. But if you get to the afternoon, you need it, eat some low carb crackers with cheese and some berries, and have some dark chocolate, have some Greek yogurt with loads of nuts or some sugar-free peanut butter in there. If you feed on the foods that don't drive your sugar up and don't drive your insulin up, you will just over time lose those cravings anyway. So don't try to restrict it. Don't try to hold back. If you do that, you'll end up with your head in the bucket of the biscuits. You need to feed on the foods you're allowed. And if you don't starve your body and you eat plenty of protein, and again, use the Defeat Diabetes recipes. There's loads of great, muffins and things you can make that are made with nut flours, and we use monk fruit sweetener. So they'll give you the taste, but they won't drive more cravings, because one biscuit, leads to 5. I saw someone today, he had 1 chocolate biscuit. He said, that's all I was going to have. He ate the packet. I said, of course you're going to eat the packet. It's driving your insulin, it's driving your sugar. And we know there's hedonic hunger. That's that dopamine kind of trigger in the brain that goes, yay, sugar, and I want more of it. So, satisfy your body with the foods you're allowed, and feed up, and, have a chocolate muffin ready in the afternoon with some butter, but make that chocolate muffin from the Defeat Diabetes website, or from, with nut flours and monk fruit, and you'll be fine. But definitely over time, cravings just go. I don't tell people to try and ignore their cravings. I feed their body with foods that stop the cravings.
Yep, absolutely. My go-tos at 3 o'clock when I feel like a biscuit are some nuts, a handful of nuts, or a piece of cheese. They're my 2 favorites, I must admit. But we all have our favorites. Okay. What else have we got here? Let me see. I saw one before that was good. Deb asks, what impacts ketosis more, fasting or eating low carb? Talk a little bit about fasting, Nicole.
Look, I think they actually work pretty much hand in hand in the end. I think in the beginning, particularly if you're coming from a traditional sort of Australian diet, we're eating a lot of carbohydrate. As soon as you drop those obvious carbs out, most people go into some form of fat adaptation, and they'll, produce some, they'll get some mild ketones in their blood. Their mitochondria in their cells start using fat as a fuel instead of using sugar, and use the ketones as a fuel. When you add intermittent fasting, it definitely accelerates it, because what we know with intermittent fasting is that, I guess I say to my clients, you're putting your insulin on more of a holiday. If you fast for 16 hours from dinner the night before to the next day, then you're not spiking your insulin, you're resting it, and it makes it more insulin sensitive, and you could become more insulin sensitive. Your body can access your fat freezer more. So they really both work. And I think in the end, and I'm sure you'd agree, Peter, and we both do fasting as well, is that once you're low carb and you don't feel hungry, you naturally intermittent fast anyway, because you wake up and you're not starving, and you can naturally go 16, 18 hours often without needing anything to eat. So I think they both do. What I find is I start people off low carb and let their bodies get fat adapted, and they know that, because either they're checking some ketones, or they just don't feel hungry, they feel energized, their blood sugars are dropping down. So we know they're in some form of mild ketosis. They're fat adapted now, And then they'll say, oh, I didn't eat breakfast yesterday. And I go, well, that's great, because today I'm going to talk about intermittent fasting. And they're naturally kind of doing it. If I brought that up in the very first session, let's take your carbs out and let's start fasting, they'd probably never come back. But they're already naturally fasting anyway and closing their kitchen earlier and opening their kitchen later. So I think they go hand in hand, but they both, you usually do get some form of ketosis with it, but I think you'll get more if you're combining both of them, and not just trying to do the fasting and then breaking your fast with a massive carb load, because I think then you're just spiking your glucose and your insulin and creating that cycle. So definitely low carb and or intermittent and fasting with low carb for sure.
Great. Okay. Louisa wants to know, I'm told I'm pre-diabetic. What is the ideal blood sugar level as per finger prick first thing in the morning before breakfast? What is the other reading that comes from pathology blood tests? Well, I might tackle that one. Give you a break, Nicole. You've been working overtime there. So pre-diabetes is an interesting condition. By definition, we talk about blood sugar levels and HbA1c levels. Blood sugar levels of being over, HbA1c levels being over 6.5 is being pre-diabetic, and then between 5.7 and 6.5 is pre-diabetic. And we used to sort of just fob off pre-diabetes a little bit and not get too worried about it, and not really do anything, until people actually became diabetic. But there's more and more research coming out now that actually pre-diabetes is quite a significant condition by itself. And even at blood sugar levels in the pre-diabetic level, there is damage being caused. And there are some people suggesting that they actually should reduce the sort of the definition, if you like, of type 2 diabetes down to the level of pre-diabetes, because it needs to be taken seriously, and that those blood sugar levels need to be addressed. So I believe that pre-diabetes is a significant issue. It's not 100% certain you'll go on to develop type 2 diabetes, but there's every chance that unless you change your eating habits, you will. I was pre-diabetic when I sort of got onto the low carb program, and I have no doubt that had I maintained the way I was eating, I would be a fully fledged diabetic a year or two after that, just as my father had been. But fortunately, I dodged a bullet and have avoided that, and I'm not pre-diabetic or diabetic. So what level? Well, we like to have our fasting blood sugar levels under 5.5. I think that's a really good level, and certainly something to aim at. Nicole, what levels do you suggest people to aim for?
Yeah, look, I always say, if we can get you under 5.5, that's really where we're trying to head. But so many people who come in and, see me at the clinic, they've been 7s and 8s for so long, and everyone's sort of said, that's okay. Or you had someone yesterday, HbA1c is, 7.5, doctor's pretty happy with that. And I'm like, well, ideally 5.5 or under is really all your body needs in terms of sugar in your blood, and anything above that is creating damage. It's damaging and oxidizing and glycating your cells. So, definitely if we can get you sort of under that 5.5, and, and we, I know that will happen absolutely on most occasions when people who go from eating 250 grams of carbohydrate a day and they go to 50 and they eat protein and greens and healthy fat, it will absolutely happen. And so many people come in and they go, I cannot believe it. I was 8 and now in 2 weeks I'm 6. I never even thought that was possible. Every day, as we know, Peter, it's absolutely possible. And, you want to be able to have that 5.5 or less. And I think, doing your intermittent fasting and your low carb program is absolutely achievable in most cases.
Great. Okay. Dawn asks, will having my thyroid removed next month affect my type 2 diabetes? Well, the short answer to that is probably not. The long answer is, our colleague Paul Mason is dying to give a talk on thyroid and low carb, so I might leave that to him for a future Facebook live session. If you'd like to hear that, let us know, and we'll bump him up the list. But there's a fascinating and very interesting relationship between thyroid and diabetes and insulin resistance and so on. That is a whole story in itself. But the short answer to that is that there shouldn't be significant problems with having your thyroid removed. Is that fair to say, Nicole?
Yeah, look, I think, yeah, I mean, I probably don't see a lot of people coming in that it makes much of a difference. If anything, we're just finding the difficulty from the weight perspective. Yep. But again, still I see people, although their progress might be slower, it definitely still can be achieved, but it definitely can make things a little harder for sure. So
yeah, and that's because your thyroid, if you remove your thyroid, you tend to become hypothyroid, which can slow down your metabolism a little bit and lead to a little bit of weight gain and so on. So that's really why it can be a problem. But in most cases with low carb, that solves that problem pretty well. Okay, the next one is, why do some of the Defeat Diabetes recipes use sesame seed oil rather than MCT oil? Nicole?
That's a good question. Well, I know, I mean, for me, sometimes cooking with MCT oils can actually impact the flavour of the food. I think generally most of our recipes are olive oil based or using coconut oil or butter. And I think the ones with sesame seed oil wouldn't be huge amounts of sesame seed oil. So I think that's the main reason why they're not using the MCT oil in there. I'm not sure if you have any additional comments to that.
No, yeah. I mean, sesame seed oil is probably not ideal, but it's certainly one of the least bad oils, if you like. I mean, generally speaking, we tend to. Well, what are your favourite oils? I mean, olive oil is obviously very healthy, but some people don't like cooking with olive oil, do they?
Yeah, look, I think olive oil needs to be used generally at low temperatures because it can cause some oxidative properties. So I usually like using olive oil as a low heat cook or raw, over salads, etc. I guess with high heat cooking, that's where we tend to maybe move towards more those saturated stable fats, which we know when heated do not get oxidized. So that's where we might use ghee or lard. Coconut oil, I guess, is a good one as well. So for high heat, tends to go for the, I tend to suggest the more saturated fats so they don't break down, and low heat is using your olive oil. We always, try to steer clear as much as we can. And I think with seed oils, sometimes there's a place depending on the recipe, but small amounts and its frequency, we don't want to be absolutely consuming with those things.
Yeah, fine. Okay. Right. Deborah writes in, hubby's sugar levels are raised after there's a period of physical activity like gardening, etc. Is this normal?
Okay. Well, I guess, when you start exercising, your body has to produce and it needs more fuel. So it's going to use, particularly if you're fat adapted anyway, it's going to make some sugar from, protein. It's going to make sugars from fats. So most people will find that they will get this big spike in their glucose just because their body's needing more fuel, and it's got to make, some fuel to be able to do the exercise, and then it tends to drop down. So if it's an exercise-induced blood glucose going up, I'm not really concerned about it. If it's food-induced glucose, then that's where I'm sort of, going, okay, what foods have you eaten that are creating that issue? But yeah, I do get a lot of people that, it's like if they're checking their ketones, and they do it straight after exercise, the ketones go the opposite way and the body sort of drops down. So I mean, you may have a different perspective on that. I'm not really concerned about it. It dissipates. and it's your average blood glucose that's the key. It's your average HbA1c. You know, I do get a lot of people that are naturally higher in the morning. We know our bodies kick into sort of like a dawn effect, where they're going to produce some sugar, because the body does still need a small amount, which it will make from your fat and your proteins. So you will get this increase in sugar naturally. And some people it's a little bit higher. And, you know, from what I've read in the research, it's about the average sugar. It's about your average blood sugar over 3 months that we're really looking at. And if your average is good, then I'm not really fussed myself about those highs that we're getting, because they're just naturally induced and they will settle down. It's the average blood sugar reading that's the key, I think. Peter, your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't get too fussed about that. It's people's response to their blood glucose response to exercise is very, very, very individual, and some people do rise. I don't worry too much about that, as long as it drops back to normal reasonably quickly. So I think that's okay. Now, you mentioned something in your answer just then, and you mentioned the dawn phenomenon, and we had another question from someone wanting to Grant actually wanted to know about the dawn phenomenon. Now, I think I actually wrote something on the dawn phenomenon for the program a few months ago. But tell us, you started to explain there what the dawn phenomenon is, and it sounded pretty good to me. So have a go at it.
Look, again, keeping it just simple is that, you know, we have to have some sugar in our body. It's like I think it's like a teaspoon or something is all we really need. And so we can't survive without that little bit of sugar. Our brain needs it. And overnight, you know, clearly we're fasting and our bodies naturally will produce, sugar. And particularly on low carb, what I find, or people who are type 2 with some medication, is, I guess I say they run out of sugar a little bit sort of earlier than normal because they're not feeding their bodies the traditional huge amount of pasta at night, and they might be on some medication that's doing some of the job as well. So they tend to wake up sometimes with a slightly elevated glucose reading, and they're concerned because they didn't have anything naughty before bed and they had their protein, and they're waking up with a higher sugar than when they went to bed. So that, I guess, is the dawn phenomena. Your body sort of run out a little bit of the sugar it needs to top up. So it kicks in and starts sort of producing its own sugar, maybe a little bit sooner than normal, and you wake up with a slightly higher elevated sugar. So again, I guess this is something, number one, I always say you've got to go back and just make sure your HbA1c, your average blood sugar readings are good, because you might still naturally, I've got a client only yesterday, she's lost 20 kilos and she was having, going to bed with a 5 and waking up at a 6. And, you know, there was nothing in her diet. She was exercising to sort of explain it, except the dawn, you know, effect. And I said, just go back and get your HbA1c. And she did that. And yesterday our discussion was her HbA1c had gone from 7.5 to 5.4. So, you know, clearly we're not worried about that little bit of elevated sugar. It's just her body that's naturally producing a bit more sugar earlier. Her average is dropping. So that's really what's happening. Sometimes it's definitely related to what we've eaten, but a majority of the time, if we're low carb or we're on some medication with type 2 diabetes, that we might just see our body kicking in a little bit sooner and spiking our sugars a little bit earlier. But it really comes down to, if you're doing the right thing with your diet, chat to your doctor about your medication, because that can be some of the issue. And, you know, get your long-term HbA1c measures checked. And, you know, generally they're going down. So I wouldn't be getting too worried. But, you know, it's, again, chat to your doctor, get your bloods done, make sure your low-carb dietitian is checking, you know, your food diaries and your tracking mechanisms to see maybe if there is any triggers. But, yeah, that's the dawn phenomenon.
Fantastic. Great explanation. Well, we're out of time. Gosh, I thought we had plenty of time left. Last time I looked at the clock, I thought we had plenty of time. But our hour is up. So, Nicole, thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in, and especially those of you who sent some questions in. I hope we've satisfied you with our answers, and we look forward to talking to you again next time. Thanks.
Bye.